Hey, it's Josh here. Wanted to talk a little bit about a book that I just finished reading. It's Sam Harris's book, Waking Up, A Guide to Spirituality Without Religion. And I had the pleasure of seeing Harris in conversation with an interviewer at a local DC. I live in Washington, D.C., so a local D.C. venue, and that was a really cool experience. Sam Harris is someone that I admire, that maybe actually among sort of the atheist thinkers that I know of, he might be the one that I feel the most connection with, and most, I guess most think that he's on the right track. He's very interested in moral and ethical issues, and it just seems to have a very reasonable approach. I think sometimes people can think that he's, quite, that he can be extreme. I don't really experience him that way. I, I see him as very level-headed for the most part. So, anyway, this was a fantastic book. He's talking about spirituality. And I actually was anticipating this book for months, if not over a year. So I was very excited when it came out. Definitely wanted to get my hands on it right away. And I was curious what he was going to say about spirituality because, I guess I don't really, since my deconversion from Christianity, I don't really consider myself a spiritual or religious person in any way. And I do kind of have, though, these experiences of kind of somewhat of a spiritual nature that, I experienced as a Christian. But it's interesting because what he talks about what he means by spirituality really has to do with altered states of consciousness, and particularly this sense of self-transcendence, or that the self is actually an illusion. So that's one key point that he makes in the book, is that the self is an illusion. That the thoughts and feelings that, and just any contents of consciousness that sort of flash on the screen of our mind are not sort of consciousness at its base. Like the base consciousness is is the environment in which those things happen. So the idea that we are kind of identified with our thoughts and feelings, that there's an I that is observing everything, there's an I that's thinking thoughts, there's an I that's feeling feelings. He's saying that, that's an illusion. Certainly he recognizes that there's a sense of self that gets built up over time that, starts off at a very early age. In childhood, we kind of develop our sense of self, possibly, as we relate to others, we kind of develop our own sense of having an individuality, and by kind of others observing us, potentially. Anyway, he really is talking about spirituality in the sense of transcending that self, and realizing that there's sort of maybe a deeper or other level of consciousness, in which the self is kind of contained, I guess, and experiencing that certain sense of consciousness can actually, be the grounds for a more ethical life, a more compassionate life, a sense of oneness with everything. He's talking about very sort of classic self-transcendent kind of experiences. He has studied meditation quite extensively, and especially in Buddhist traditions, and has definitely experienced for himself kind of this sense that there is no self. And I actually am pretty familiar with those ideas, at least as far as not being sort of unified or fused with the contents of consciousness. because acceptance and commitment therapy, which is a form of psychotherapy that I'm very interested in, have been for about a year and a half, it talks about these ideas as well. It talks about sort of three senses of self. There's self as content, which is statements like I am, an artist, or I am unhappy, or whatever. It's just sort of whatever messages we tell ourselves about ourselves. And then there's self as process, like an ongoing awareness that, oh, I'm thinking this, I'm feeling this, in the present moment, this is what I'm experiencing. And then there's self as context, which is, I think, more the sense of base consciousness that Sam Harris is talking about, which is like the sense of self in which all of those things occur. The way that ACT talks about, ACT is acceptance and commitment therapy, the way that ACT talks about the self is a little bit different, but still I'm kind of used to a lot of these ideas about thoughts and feelings and how, they come and go, they arise, they fall away, and you can actually notice them arising in consciousness. So, if you're noticing them arising, then how then are you the one who's causing them to arise? How are you the thinker if you can notice the thought arising without your bidding? So, anyway, it's a great book. He's talking a lot about, how this sense of spirituality can improve our lives, can alleviate suffering, because as we get a glimpse that we're not one with our sense of self, we can actually, the thing is that sense of oneness with self is a lot of what causes our own psychological suffering, because, ourselves are very needy, ourselves are very judgmental, ourselves are very, they're not compassionate. They're full of all kinds of desire that makes us experience most moments of our lives, maybe even, or at least a good portion of our lives as lacking in some way. But if you can sort of transcend that and get to a place where you don't feel a lack, that you understand that you're not unified with that self, that is itself part of just the contents of consciousness, that there can be a sense of well-being that you can access through that, that if accessed sort of in daily life, as situations arise when that would be helpful, you can sort of find that sense and find some relief from the sort of like craziness of always being on, always sort of being an I guess. He talks about some interesting stuff like how hallucinogens, or not hallucinogens, well, I guess, yeah, drugs like LSD, or magic mushrooms and stuff like that, how they can bring about these altered states of consciousness, how they do bring about an altered state of consciousness, and how that can be sort of a gateway to opening your awareness to the fact that these altered states do exist. And he talks a lot about kind of the denial by secular people of the fact that these states do exist, and kind of just a dismissiveness about spirituality from secular people, which I found very very helpful, actually, because I've been pretty dismissive of spirituality in any sense. It just feels like a lot of mumbo jumbo. And what he's saying is, you don't have to accept, you don't have to accept the teachings of religion, or the you don't have to accept the spiritual mumbo jumbo and also reject the empirical observations of what consciousness actually is. Like, you don't have to have one or the other. You can throw away the bad stuff and keep the things that are actually things that you can experience for yourself. You don't have to take anything on faith. You can he contends that you can actually experience this stuff firsthand. you don't need to believe any particular thing about the nature of reality based on that. So anyway, it's a great book. I highly recommend it. It's given me a lot to think about with regards to Buddhism and spirituality. Previously I had been very sort of, Buddhism, whatever. Now I'm seeing that Buddhism actually may have some powerful insights into, you know, the nature of consciousness and psychology. So that's something I will probably be exploring more. It's made me kind of want to meditate, whereas previously I was not really interested in meditating. I did meditate some, have meditated some, but not in a very serious way, and not much. Although, I mean, in ACT, there's definitely, you know, mindfulness meditation is something that's practiced. And ACT has these very similar ideas about the nature of suffering and how suffering is primarily about sort of being fused with your thoughts and feelings and being unable to do the things that you really care about doing because you're so fused with these, you know, conceptualizations of yourself, or, you know, you're so sort of hamstrung by your thoughts and feelings that you can't move, or at least move in ways that are important and valuable to you. So it's kind of troubling in a way, because the sense of like there not being an I, there not being a self, or at least not one that, or at least like the essence of us not being a self, that's a rather troubling one in a way, because we do sort of need the self to kind of get by in life, it seems, and it can be disorienting to realize that I'm actually not one with all my thoughts and feelings. Like, that in itself is something that arises in consciousness. I'm not the same as all of that. I'm the observer of those things going on. I'm observing the sense that I have a self, but I am not one with that sense. Yeah, that can be a bit of an unsettling reality, I guess. And it's kind of made me think a lot about, okay, well, how does this integrate with existentialism? Could one be sort of an existentialist and a Buddhist? And, you know, can one transcend oneself while at the same time, or be able to transcend oneself, you know, more or less at will, while at the same time holding on to those parts of the self that are good, and also realizing that to some extent, you know, you have to work with the self. You have to do things in life. You have to sort of find a way of navigating that self. So yeah, anyway, really interesting stuff. Highly recommend this book, Waking Up by Sam Harris. I think it could really open your eyes to some interesting insights about the mind and the nature of consciousness. If you're not, you know, very familiar with Buddhism or mindfulness meditation, or I mean, or really maybe even if you are, and especially if you're kind of dismissive about, you know, the idea of spirituality or altered states of consciousness or self-transcendence, then this might be a good book, because he's definitely, you know, sort of catering to those people who are skeptical. So anyway, thanks for watching. Peace out.